Hi, Alec. Thanks so much for joining us today. And it's nice to have somebody who's such a practitioner in this space.
Right on. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I'm stoked to be here.
Why don't you give our audience a little background about yourself and your show and what sort of pulled you into this space?
Yeah, 2016, light bulb went on, never went off. Infinitely curious about AI, enterprise AI in particular. I was exposed to robotic process automation, which now sounds pretty basic, but back then it was not, and have self-educated since and been building in public along the way, helping others understand what I'm learning. And now I've since become technical in the space as a non-engineer within enterprise AI. AI with Alec, in case you missed the microphone flag, is my multi-platform podcast and thought leadership platform where I put all sorts of content out in and around this space that is exploding.
Yeah, I love your shows. I've listened through them. I like your very practical approach in the way you discuss and talk about things. My background, was industrial engineering, and this is when we were talking about statistical quality control way back in the 90s, and we were dumping data into Excel spreadsheets and trying to figure out data patterns from it. So it's fun to see this come full circle, where we have cloud scalers capable, bandwidth available, compute. And now with AI becoming available, it's really astounding.
Yeah, 100%. People still are using Excel spreadsheets left and right, as you know, which is wild. But yeah, it's a crazy time.
Yeah. So, in the people that you've met and interviewed and talked with, what's your feeling in terms of, this, what's practical, what's not practical, what's working, what's landing? At Thing Zero, we have some very clear ideas how we think this space is going to go, but I'd really be interested to understand, what do you think are the most pressing issues?
I think Mark Benioff might have said it best on a Logan Bartlett show just ahead of earnings, I guess it was last week. But he essentially said that large language models were revolutionary in terms of their incremental benefit to the enterprise as each consecutive new model was released by OpenAI and Anthropic and so on and so forth. But now, thankfully, in some respects, they're not revolutionary, they're evolutionary, which is allowing folks to really get their footing and make strategic plans to use enterprise AI and build intelligent systems in a way where they feel like they can predict a little bit of the future. And I think that's been a really interesting trend because everybody's chasing Palantir now. And if you're not, familiar with Palantir, for those in the audience, it's a really important company to understand because it steps in and through all forms of data modeling that a lot of companies are now realizing we got to get our infrastructure right, we got to get our platforms right, and then we can really step into people, process, and technology and realize the potential of enterprise AI, which the hype is at a very high level right now versus the actual tangible results.
Yeah, that it certainly. I mean, as you and I have lived long enough to see the internet bubble and many subsequent bubbles that are associated with the hype around things. I think it's, the idea of this, the hype curve and then what becomes mature and then really drives productivity in society is interesting. And my personal, experience with it has been, this has been the fastest adoption and from using to productivity with the least amount of pain that I've ever experienced in my life. Truly.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think sometimes folks, and going back to the question in regards to what I'm seeing and those I'm talking to and advising and whatnot, I think sometimes we forget that we've been here before, right? This is a paradigm shift, and we have experienced paradigm shifts in the past. But this is a different kind of paradigm shift because it's like we've invented electricity, But the thing is, instead of electricity coming top down, meaning the government and the biggest companies in the world that quote unquote can afford electricity get access first, and eventually it trickles down over a period of time, everybody gets access instantaneously. So we're all starting from the same starting point, which is really exciting, but also terrifying, in many respects. And so I think that's part of what we're all trying to deal with is exponential change, which generally speaking, we as a species don't do so well with, and we're all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, I think of, as an industrial engineer, we were programming robots at in the beginning, which was like, how do you make a robot work? And I had the fortunate opportunity to work for a company called Schlumberger, and the one of the most interesting and wonderful experiences I had is they built this natural gas meter manufacturing facility, and they built it in Reims, which is in the Champagne district in France, and it was built by Renzo Piano, and he built the modern art, the Pompidou in Paris, and so you walked in, and there were these giant round windows, and that you had just like this feeling like you're in this beautiful building. And it was this mix of robots and people perfectly augmenting and working with each other. And you talk to the people, and there was a lovely cafeteria. It felt like what you would see with like Google today or something. It wasn't this manufacturing site. It was like this harmonized place where people and that would work. And that had such a big impact on my life because it was a commodity product. But can you imagine that as a second buyer from any gas utility, that you would want to go check your supplier, and which supplier would you want to go to see once a year? Reims, France, to go to the Champagne district, right? So, I think behind all this, we have to remember that it's about people and how we make people more productive, and what is this augmentation and what is it equal?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I had 10 units of bandwidth to invest or capital, I would maybe put five, or excuse me, 1 to 2 into quote unquote automation. And I put everything else and then some into augmentation. A lot of folks are starting to think more and more about, instead of just thinking about optimizing and efficiency, how do we create AI native capabilities that are brand new, and create, blue sky incremental value that otherwise wasn't there, because large language models enable capabilities that obviously with the difference between deterministic and probabilistic software weren't possible before. And I think some of the most innovative and largest companies in the world are proving out that those that are leaning into this and racing towards and iterating their way through it are creating net new revenue streams. And I think that's where guys like me get excited. The efficiency, the automation, okay, that's great. But what really I think is remarkable and cool, to your point, is how do you bring humans and machines together in a way that creates value that previously wasn't possible? And some of the stuff that you and I connected on that I think is super fascinating, it's outside of my understanding, it's clearly in yours, is AI in the real world. Like, I love robots. I don't know much about them, but I know what AI systems in the digital domain can do. And when you start looking at companies like Figure with Brett Adcock and what Elon's doing, it's just extraordinary. And I think we're just at the very beginning of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Our view from Thing Zero is there's two aspects that are like really important to us. Is that we live in such a insecure cyber space,
Right.
and this idea that the federal government's been pushing critical infrastructure protection, and how do you do this in this what we call brownfield world, where there's all this legacy equipment that maybe you want to get data out of it to go build something, but you can't, connecting to it in itself opens a vulnerability. And so,
Yeah.
for us, it's how do you like think of it, like the automobile, right? It all started. They weren't thinking about seatbelts and airbags and and guardrails and should you be drinking or not drinking when you're driving, right? And as it became more mainstream and we matured through understanding the value of life of people, we started investing in reducing highway fatalities and understanding the root cause of them. And I think that's kind of where we're at now, which is there's all this information from industrial processes that we can gain, but what's the risk associated with it?
Yeah, I agree. I to build on that too. One of the territories that I think is fascinating is just data center infrastructure and what's required from a power grid perspective for what we can clearly see and understand with enterprise AI in particular. There was a guy I talked to, Philip Johnston, StarCloud co-founder and CEO. He's shooting data centers into outer space to take advantage of the proximity to the sun. And at first you're like, why would you do? And then you realize you can figure out pretty quickly why you would do that. So I think that territory is fascinating. And as I have spoke about previous to jumping on air here, I just think AI in the real world is just fascinating. I think all the value chains around it are quite interesting, and it's a major U.S. priority to strengthen that stuff and to make sure that we have enough capacity to power the tech stack that we hope that the rest of the world will embrace as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then how do you do that in a way like heading off down that space? But I love it, and we have people that we are associated with that work in that space. Is like there's this abundance of natural gas, which is relatively clean, and so now people are like powering data centers and cooling them through natural gas and then doing the carbon capture and sequestering it back in. And so you have this virtual, loop, and solar is obviously fabulous, is the best, or wind or whatever, these alternatives trying to get into the right competitive price. But the demand, you're right, this is like an incredible, suddenly it's not like it's used, it gets turned on and it's on, and that power is there as a constant thing. So it makes the model, easier to create for like, what is the cost and how will the demand be? And it won't be this peaky type stuff. But yeah. So on our side, where we're really diving into, and, it'd be interesting to share some of your thoughts in this space, is these existing processes where what we've seen is like a rise of a lot of SaaS platforms that are specialized in what they do. So let's say I'm a specialist in rotating machines and I understand the physics of that. What I end up doing is like buying a service that helps me solve a problem for rotating machines. And our problem, or at least our view, is that it's a good temporary fix. But if we want to prepare the data estate for, AI, I want to take both my purchasing system, my demand forecasting system, my operations system, and I want to put them all in one place so that data is exposed. And then I can use natural queries to say, why is this doing better than this? Or why is that doing that? So this preparation of this data estate is it's a digital transformation, and it's interesting watching like where you're going to move from an on-premises system up to the cloud, or how you're going to move that data there. It's this real like investment that needs to be made, and then with this promise of what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'll. Here comes a soundbite, right? It's existential, and anybody can, challenge me on that, but it is existential because of the following, which is I agree with everything you just said, but the way I would say it a little bit differently is that historically, meaning previous to ChatGPT, we built databases to serve applications, SaaS, industrial complex, et cetera. And therefore, an application-centric architecture was to serve the purpose of enabling a SaaS, application to operate and be useful in an, relatively isolated way. And so therefore you have siloed data sets, even though they're redundant. But very quickly, thanks to intelligent systems that can be built with LLMs, you can now move from an application-centric to a data-centric. And ultimately, if you want to get wild, you get into the knowledge-centric architecture, a la, the Palantirs of the world that enable that at scale. And so all you got to do is think about if and when you hesitate or you wait or however you want to think about this and not actually move on it, if and when your competitor steps into that arena and iterates their way through to not just a data-centric, but a knowledge-centric architecture, they're going to have decision-making leverage on you. And then, of course, agentic labor and digital labor advantages over you that are going to be catastrophic to your P&L because of the nature of the speed, the efficiency, and the productivity of which they will now be able to operate. And, they'll be able to provide their people with, for example, 3 to 10 times the firepower and horsepower that your people get. It's like playing baseball against a team, with a metal versus a wooden bat. So you don't want to do that. And if you're waiting for perfect, I don't know how to say it in a more direct way, but take a look at Snowflake, take a look at Databricks, get your AI, centralized and AI ready, and then, rock and roll your way through it. But don't wait at this point. I don't think anybody, thinks that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. In the data state, though, just going back to this, where we're operating in this, example is operating technology. So I've got a refinery that's has all these processes with data flowing off it. I've got a manufacturing facility. I've got a wind farm. I've got whatever it is. This idea that you're going to predict something and then act on that prediction is this idea of augmentation. And when you pull all of that operating technology, which is what's happening in the real world, and then apply it to how, let's say a simple example, a small utility, all of a sudden they have all these solar panels sitting on houses. How much power should I buy tomorrow versus what's going to be consumed by the house versus how sunny is it going to be, right?
Yeah.
These are complex systems that you need to have the dynamic capability to be able to make decisions around.
100%. And just to build on that, sometimes folks get a little confused on this one. So just to give you something to react to and or build off of, like, descriptive analytics is the rear view mirror. What happened, right? What was the football score on Sunday? Did USC win or did they lose, right? Shout out to my alma mater. Predictive analytics is like what most likely is going to happen next week. We're playing Purdue. We're probably going to whoop them, obviously, says the guy that went to USC. But prescriptive analytics is therefore what should we do next? So next best action. And going back to your point, if you wire up your systems and your data sets so that you can then act off of prescriptive analytics because you're running simulations and digital twins and lots of different ways to say the same thing, and you're competing with a company that is not doing that, you're going to be way more profitable, and therefore you're going to win at scale. And that's why I get into that idea that this stuff is existential at this point. If you're not doing it, watch out.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's, some of the things is like using a plow with a horse versus a tractor, right? This is the X multiplier in these systems is like incredible. Now, the Pandora's box side of it is I open a door to a system that's a brownfield that has technical debt. It's running Windows XP with known vulnerabilities. And I'm trying to pull the data out of there, and then I want to act on it. I want to change the settings in a machine so that the quality will remain good.
Yes, absolutely.
I open a door to ransomware, and now I've not just shut down the ability to do email or send an invoice. I've shut down my money machine, which is producing things in the real world, right? And I think the impact and understanding of how important that is in preparing your systems and putting what is sort of state of the art, which doesn't have to look like a NASCAR with a bunch of logos. You can buy the best now globe scalar stuff and just turn on what they have, and it's enough. You can buy it pre-configured like that and go capture your data and not have to have like a pit crew with a bunch of mechanics just to run the machine anymore. So this is what I think the shift has to be from companies thinking themselves as system integrators to thinking about what is the straightforward way that I can get my data to analyze it without having fields of people to put all this stuff together.
110%. And it reminds me of what we talked about before about the 90-10 stuff before we jumped on air, right? So the capabilities that are available today in all these different areas are so far ahead of the general understanding of diverse populations within bigger businesses and otherwise. And that's not a criticism, it's just a fact. Mm-hmm. And so what needs to happen is you got to get the right people in the room and crawl, walk, run your way through this, while starting with what is the catastrophic risk associated with this decision and mitigate that and steer clear of that. But then you got to get in there and start doing stuff because you can't wait anymore. But you gotta be really, to your point, aware of what does catastrophic risk look like? What's a non-0% chance of what can happen? But all due respect to the technical teams, that are in the ears of non-technical senior leaders and terrifying them, those risks are not the kinds of risks that cannot be mitigated. They can be mitigated. You got to do something a little bit different, and you do have to take some calculated risks. But you can't just sit there and wait for AI perfect. It doesn't exist.
No. And I think in our space where, and I, I'm going to go back to practical application. I worked in a manufacturing facility in Kentucky, and I'd gone to see all the clients, and then had worked in product management, and then they put me in charge of half the factory. And when I went into the factory, they're like, "Oh, these folks back there, they can't get their quality right. They don't know what to do, And so I got up at 5:00 in the morning on a shift change and went in and started talking to them all. And guess what? They go home and they pull an engine out of a tractor, rebuild it, and put it back in their tractor. They know exactly what to do. And so when you start taking the human potential, which is what we did, was walk through and say what needs to be better, and you make a list of all those things, and then prioritize it, and then get the design engineers to actually help them build their cells. We went from like low 80s quality to mid 90s quality in like 4 months, with our production gone up, and then happier people. They're engaged in this process. So where I'm kind of leading to this is the organizational change management and getting people involved in this process so that they understand they don't feel threatened by a robot taking their job. I mean, GM, one point they started a factory, they were boasting that they wouldn't even have to turn the lights on. It was a total failure because it didn't work. So it needs to be this augmentation thing. So then the question is how do you get the knowledge of the best operator and share it with all the operators so that everybody gets to grow?
Yeah. I mean, so the first thing is the more things change, the more they stay the same. People, process, technology. This is no different, right?
Yeah.
First and foremost. Second, and you're talking to a resident, data modeling nerd. You got to think about ontology, which are call it 150 to 500 different topics that you and I could talk about as human beings very easily in regards to logic and things that really drive a business across a value chain, but are difficult to represent in a quote unquote spreadsheet. And you got to operationalize that with a knowledge graph. And then you got to run a knowledge graph that gets a lot of stuff out of people's heads and puts it into a language, which is the knowledge graph that both machines and humans can understand. And then every time somebody touches that intelligent system, they being a human, they being an agent or otherwise, the system gets better, the system gets smarter, the system becomes more helpful and augments humans more and more effectively. But to your point about the fear, that's never going to go away. It's human, right? So the thing that gets me pretty, intrigued and excited, on all fronts is helping big businesses in particular better understand how to structure, cross-functional teams and pods that are supported by discrete and smart, tech stacks that are AI native, but mitigate catastrophic risk to kind of start doing stuff. It's like, wow, this is pretty amazing, right? We got superpowers going on over here.
Yeah.
But it never changes, right? People process technology, and humans are humans, and you got to be super empathetic to that stuff. But you got to move at a certain pace. But you also, this stuff is going to take a long time to unfold. It's not overnight, as much as we would like for it to be sometimes.
It's interesting, the preparation, though. There's a lot of people really poo-pooing the agentic AI story because they feel like it's so overhyped and
Of course.
thought about it. Yeah. But for me, I mean, if I look at the simplistic thing is, imagine, you have a machine learning model that is looking at a machine and it's saying, okay, it's operating. Oh, no, we know from the visual cues, from the vibrations, from temperature, whatever, it's about to change.
Yeah.
And notifying an operator and having an agent pop up that is not clippy, that has the capability of not, it was cute, but
Yeah.
that has the capability of saying, would you like help? And then taking the knowledge of the smartest, most capable, competent, longest practical operator and sharing that across thousands of operators, will, basically allow all boats to be, rised up on the tide. And to me, this is the practical part of it. That's no different than we sat around a fire 40,000 years ago telling the stories of our people and why you would get eaten if you went to this part. So it's like, how do we do that in a way where it's seen as that same concept of sharing of information, that it's embraced and they understand through that the company becomes more competitive, that their job security becomes better, that their quality of life becomes better because they're not chasing, the problem, that they're in front of the problem.
Yeah. Psychological safety is a really important part of it. Big shout out to Mike Forster, who's one of the AI leaders at Yum Brands, who I think gave arguably the best talk at Snowflake Summit, back in June. I happened to attend it. And one of the things he talked about was he walked through, and this is public information because it was anybody could attend, but he walked through the way that Yum Brands, head of AI, convinced the CEO and CFO to lock the two of them and 398 of the top executives across the entire business, effectively in a conference room for 7 to 10 days, I think it was, working days, to understand a bespoke, custom, deeply specific enterprise AI curriculum that I think, and Mike, you can keep me honest on this one, I think it was custom built by HBS. And the reason they did it was, to your point, Marvin, is to trigger and unlock the light bulb turning on for all of these executives to realize, wow, we got to run at this. This is going to make all of us that much better. We're going to scale ourselves. We're going to scale our teams. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually a force multiplier. And oh, by the way, we're going to outsource a bunch of tedious but important work to digital labor, a la AI agents, so that the agents can do the work that frankly needs to get done. But we humans are better at other things. We're going to focus our 80-20 rule on the high impact stuff. And they're crushing it, right? And so I think it was the best presentation I heard at Summit, because it was practical and it was real. And psychological safety is a big part of what I think unleashes the opportunity that everyone is pursuing, but few have been able to really realize so far in the enterprise AI transformation journey.
That's a great story. No, I mean, and that's, to me, is that is where you're starting with the belief that if everybody can be on the same page and understand what it means and taking time, like it's to you, I think your point is like it is worthwhile for you to hit the stop button and put everybody together and get them on the same page and understand what's going on so that you can move forward. I think what I'm seeing a lot of these things are is it's, oh, you're in charge of digital transformation, great. The executives are busy doing what they're doing, but they're not saying this is it. I don't know if you ever saw it. I always loved it. It was my favorite comic, single frame comic. King sitting up on a hill. He's watching the battle down below, and his gesture or whatever says there's somebody to see you, says it's important, and he's got a Gatling gun, and the king's like, I'm busy right now, tell him to come back later. Right, so that to me is one of these moments where you need to seriously understand the impact of this, what your investments look like, get your people all the way from the operating experts through to the finance people to say, if we had this, what does it look like? What is our journey? What is our agile development methodology that's going to allow us to test things, fail fast, move, adopt it, and then spread it through your organization?
Yeah, agreed. And one thing I didn't mention, and I want to make sure that Mike gets credit for this too, is hands in dirt. So this curriculum was not just like sit around in a conference room and read and like, people do PowerPoints and things. It was literally get your hands in the dirt and use the tools. Mm-hmm. And I think if there's one thing, I get asked this question often, amongst others, but if there's one thing that every executive at the highest level of the org, and I mean the CEO down, should do, is they should start using these AI native tools themselves and unleash the magic and follow the Ethan Mollick 10 plus hour rules. You got to use them for 10 plus hours until you start to realize, oh my gosh, right? This is the value that people have promised. This is the signal, and you got to do it yourself. You can't listen to others. You can't read about it. You got to do it,
I went through that journey myself. We used Copilot as part of our thing in Teams. And I've spent the last 2 years basically populating Teams with all the subject matter stuff.
Nice.
PDFs, everything in there. And plus all of my prior art, which was associated with consulting engagement. What does it look like? How do you deliver it? What does successful delivery look like, etc.? I can tell you that I'm putting some like white paper concepts together for clients, and you end up with 24 pages of absolutely non-hallucinated material that would have taken me 3 weeks that you can do in 3 days, in 3 hours, I should say. And it's like phenomenal. And it's everything where you express what is needed. Before, you would have given a client a 3-page document and then spent, an hour explaining what it is. And each party would have had the holes on what they interpret or don't understand. And now it's all laid out in exact detail of what you're going to go do and deliver. And to me, this is like, I don't know, getting your driver's license and going from riding a bicycle to being able to drive somewhere. It's just like the multiplier is phenomenal.
That's a killer comparison, for sure. There's a Lenny Rachitsky, who I love Lenny's podcast. He interviewed someone from Microsoft. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen different highlights on Twitter, and I'm dying to check it out. But it's this leader was talking about this idea that pretty quickly we're going to start to shift from thinking about org charts, into workflows and outputs, and that it's going to start to deconstruct a lot of the way that we used to think about an industrialized model of how a business operates and the org chart that's on a piece of paper. And getting into, to your point, like once that happens, think about how much faster you can go in all sorts of different directions. And I think that's what gets folks like us really excited, is once you see it, once you feel it, once you experience it, it's like, wow, if I can go this much faster in a car, what happens when I get on a plane? right? And what are the implications of that for my business? And that's the stuff that just
What's
lights
the
out.
capital infrastructure that I need to do that? I mean, these guys came out of World War II after the Berlin Lift and formed FedEx, and we all know what happened after that. Nobody believed you needed a parcel overnight. Now you've got Amazon, like one of the comedians joked, it was like Amazon now, Amazon tomorrow. So it's delivering what you think you need the next day, right? So,
Well, have you seen that though, Marvin? I didn't know this, but recently, they run simulations and they stock, inventory associated with, to your point, what they predict will be ordered and so on and so forth to increase the and compress the time that Alec presses the button versus the time that the dog food shows up for Winston, Alec's dog. I think it's fascinating,
oh, it's phenomenal. Yeah. So I think that, our bottom message as a company, as Thing Zero, is really that, where, and this isn't the pitch, this is where you're combining this data infrastructure with your security infrastructure. And, well, I'll segue into a story. One of our colleagues on the team was working with a client a year and a half ago, and they had their whole POS system captured, ransomware, right? So this is, to me, it's an operating technology. $20 million a day they were losing, right? So how much would you invest to avoid that risk, right? So what would you do to prevent 20 factories from being ransomed and shut down? So this is a reality, and so for us, like preparing the data estate, and when I worked in the gas metering business, when we built a 48-inch 900 psi gas metering turbine, we didn't look at the safety specs after when we're installing it. It was designed to an industrial standard that would meet whatever regulation you needed. And so people have to change the optics on this. They need to think about, to your point, what you said, what is the risk? What is the outcome? And you don't buy a car and retrofit airbags and ABS brakes into it. It's all a connected system that is known about the risks associated with it and how you survive, So that needs to be as important as like, how do I spin this up and get it to happen to improve an industrial process? It needs to be built into it.
Yeah, and when you're in a car that has airbags, don't put your feet on the dash.
Yes, correct.
Just FYI.
Yeah.
Because that won't end well if you get in an accident.
Yeah, so we've covered quite a span of topics. I think preparation of the data estate, starting with understanding what you're going to have as an outcome from this, getting your team on board and understanding what the journey is going to look like, rewarding people for failing fast. I think this, again, is the culture. I was in product management for a long time. Everybody made their bonus on the ones that were selling, for instance, SIM cards to GSM providers, because the GSM industry was blowing up. I was doing, consumer cybersecurity on how you make sure that their, store doesn't get hacked, their virtual online store, or how do you make passports more secure. You always missed your number, but you may have created a multi-billion-dollar new market, but you got hammered because you didn't make your number on a brand new market in a brand new space. So people take risk that creates long-term growth, and they need to be rewarded not for sitting there doing what's safe. They need to be rewarded for going and making what's going to change and move the needle.
Yeah, and to build on that, shout out Charlie Munger, right? Show me incentive, I'll show you the outcome. And whether you believe in OKRs, and if you set your OKRs, if you don't miss on 25 to 30% of them, you didn't stretch far enough. All that stuff comes down to the fundamentals of leadership, right? And to your point, the culture of what are we really optimizing for and what are we trying to achieve. quote unquote failure is just a science experiment, if you will, that gave you some data that you get to use. And hopefully, if you quote unquote failed, you failed in a small way, and you succeeded in many other big ways, and you don't go down that track any further than you already did.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest ones that we saw, if anybody questions this, when I was studying industrial engineering, we did a tour of a GM factory, and then we did a tour of a Honda factory.
Ah,
1/3 the space, same output, and every worker in there had the right to shut down the whole assembly
yeah,
line. And you talk about empowerment, and you talk about shift. The U.S. car market went from like 90% domestic to whatever we are today. I don't even know what that percentage is, and it happened like that. And so we're at one of these fundamental moments where it's like, how do we use this to remain competitive? That we answer the questions like Porter: what is our sustainable competitive advantage? What does this mean, and how monumental this is? And I think it's fun to be living through this, and it's a great place to be.
yeah, 100%. There's a Kurt Mumel, head of AI strategy for Data IQ. He was such an eloquent, awesome conversation around enterprise AI and agents and multi-agent frameworks. And in this area, to your point, he talked about, he's like, look, you want to make sure that as a business, you're figuring out how to use all this, modern infrastructure in a way to make the beer taste better, right? If that's your core business, is making the beer, make it taste better, right?
Yeah.
As long as you do that, you're good,
Yeah. No, for sure. And I remember I had a father-in-law that was an investment banker, and he said, "Oh, you're industrial engineering. Why don't you go to this factory tour with me and think about investing?" These guys made plastic parts for cars. And so I talked to my prof before I went in there, and he said, "Okay, if you see automation and where one person was standing there and one person is still standing there, or you listen and the most busiest machine in the factory is the regrinding machine for plastic parts, you know that they've invested their money and failed." And they did. He was like spot on, right? So automation has to have an impact that you can measure.
Without a doubt, you got to be subject matter experts, and the business folks, never mind the technologists, right? The subject matter experts and the business folks need to be empowered, especially the operators, in conjunction with the deeply technical and data folks, et cetera. But it's got to be a team sport and team decision.
Really fun conversation. We could go on for days in all different places, but thank you so much for joining us on this. I hope we have many discussions and we get to sit back 20 years from now and say, wow, that was something. So,
no doubt. Thanks, Marvin. I appreciate the time and look forward to next time.
take care.